Hi, we're Auction Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions.
Hi Naomi.
Hello.
Welcome to the Shoot Room. Can you tell people who you are and what you do?
I'm Naomi Conway, and I'm director of an entity called National Parks Partnerships that belongs to all 15 of the UK's national parks. And I'll probably talk more about what we do and who we are later on.
Perfect. My favourite Shoot Room question, and the one I'm going to open with is, can you take us through your life and career contents pages? If you were a book, what are the chapters that have got you to this point?
Wow. I'll start with education. It's a traditional place to start. I studied history of art at university just because I thought it would be fun and interesting, because I was really into visual arts as a kid. And
why into visual?
Because my dad used to, and my mum, but my dad used to take us to galleries, museums, churches, old buildings, historical places as kids, and I just found it fascinating. Just liked being with art, objects, and loved the stories about it. And I love history as well, so for me, history and art combined is like, yeah. So I did a degree in that, and it was fun, but it wasn't particularly practical. So I did a postgrad in arts administration because I thought that might be more job oriented. And as part of that postgrad, I had to do a work placement, or a few work placements. And one was at a theatre company, a youth theatre company. There's a charity as well for kids, able-bodied and disabled children. And that turned into a job, and that was my first job. And when I worked there, I discovered fundraising as a thing that you could do, because no career person ever talks to you about fundraising or working in the non-profit sector, actually. And I worked with some great people there, a fundraiser called Callie, who was sort of a bit of a mentor to me, and realised, this is a thing that I quite like and can do. Was there for a few years, went to some other charities, just mainstream charities, and ended up doing corporate fundraising jobs, because that was the area I liked. I like working with businesses.
What does that look like on a daily? What does corporate fundraising look like for someone who?
Corporate fundraising depends what entity you're working for, but it means finding ways to engage your companies with your cause. And that can be traditional things like being the charity of the year for a company, or getting to do fundraising events for you. If you're a non-profit that owns assets like locations or exhibitions at a gallery, you can then have sponsors, so people where it's slightly more commercial, but it's sort of a mixture of philanthropy and commercial working. So yeah, you're selling like a project or an idea to that partner and helping them maximise it for their needs, but also helping your non-profit.
Sounds very entrepreneurial, just in a different context.
Yes, it is. It's like, I think it's like the fun, nice side of sales. There's a lot of the techniques are the same as sales, but you wouldn't go in as a hard salesperson. You just die a death in the non-profit sector being that hard edged. You need to embody the cause and be quite passionate about the cause, so that whoever your potential partner is wants to come on board and work together with you. So if you make it too transactional, it just won't work. Corporate is, I really like that blend of sort of thinking entrepreneurially, but ultimately doing it not to make your boss richer. So that's quite fun. And then I saw my dream job advertised, which was corporate fundraiser. I can't remember what the actual title was, but it's in corporate fundraising at the National Portrait Gallery, because I was like, history of art and fundraising. Yep. And I remember telling everyone I knew, I was like, oh my God, I've seen my dream job, which is not like me. I was like, oh my God, I have to get this job. And I did get the job, probably because I was just obsessed with it. And
when you walked in, were you overtly, this is my dream job?
Yeah. And it was I think I had 3 interviews. I know it was really between me and someone who was more experienced, I think. But hopefully my enthusiasm kind of came through in that interview, and I got the job.
I think that's great advice for anyone out there that does find their dream job. We've been really fortunate that a few people in the team, some are sat in this room, in fact, 2 of them sat in this room, are like, no, this is it. And from an interview panel, you want people to stand out and compete for it. And if you do feel that way about a job, don't hold it back. Just go hard after it.
Just say, this is absolutely for me. It will come through. And so I was there for 13 years because it was my dream job. But I grew in seniority in that time, ended up heading up the sort of fundraising team. But I remained a specialist in corporate partnerships all that time because that was sort of my main area. But I learned about the fundraising mix, which means all the different ways you can generate income for a non-profit. So from individuals, membership schemes, trusts and foundations, events, capitals, like if you're doing renovations and things like that. So it was quite a cool learning ground and just a great team, amazing location, right in the heart of London. I'm a Londoner, so it was, well, I was until 3 years ago. So it was, yeah, dreamy.
When you think back, what are the couple of things that pop into your head as being like the most exciting, fun things you got to do?
Well, I mean, like our openings were just so celeb filled, which is quite shallow, but actually as someone in your sort of 20s and 30s, it was just like Kate Moss, like Naomi Campbell. It wasn't just all supermodels, it was like actors. I met like some of my heroes. I met Annie Lennox and chatted with her, and the Pet Shop Boys, Neil Turner. Like, blew my mind.
Did you ever meet Belinda Carlisle?
I did not meet Belinda Carlisle.
Damn it.
But so she's one I still have on my list. But that's all of some of it was very shiny. But actually what I really loved was, because my job was to get sponsors for exhibitions, was like before an exhibition went live, you'd plan it for 3 years in advance, and I'd get to sit in a room with the curator and they'd show me their flip book of what they want to put in the exhibition. They'd tell me the story of the exhibition, because I'd have to put together a proposal and try and get sponsors. And for me, that is like heaven, having someone tell you a story about art, and tell you their vision for the exhibition, and then you see it come to life and you get to walk around it. Oh, that was a good one, showing Stanley Tucci around the Giacometti exhibition with the curator, because he was doing a film about Giacometti and he wanted to come into the gallery really early. So we let him in early and walked around. I just looked at him going, I love you. Yeah, but so being that close to like the people who is just so knowledgeable about art and who've got this ability to tell a story through choosing these works and then making it actually real is really cool.
That sounds amazing. Okay, so 13 years and then a change?
Then, yeah, I was I'd had my son sort of towards the end of that time of the portrait gallery, and then I'd come back and was still really enjoying it, but I was getting in my comfort zone, and I realised that someone else should have this amazing job. Like, someone else needs to have the pleasure and the excitement that I had at the start that I no longer had. So I was looking around for what my next step might be, and I didn't want to do the same job but just in another arts organisation.
How were you self-aware enough to realise that?
I was sent on there was a really cool group that was, I can't remember the name of it, but it was about helping women in the arts become more senior in the arts. It was acknowledging that not enough women were at director roles in the culture sector. So a group of women themselves who were sort of, including my boss.
Is it a male-dominated industry?
No, not the cohort underneath director level, no.
Right.
Very female-dominated. But then, amazingly, at the top, this has changed in the last 10 years, but there was a real glass ceiling for women to step into those spaces. So the women themselves, like who were sort of senior to me, this included my boss, nominated women like me who were sort of at that senior management level but hadn't taken the step up to kind of get training, peer support. So I went away and did some courses and went away on a weekend, and I was just heading towards 40 at that point as well, which I think is quite an interesting point as well, sort of in your professional life. And we all were talking about our working lives, our work-life balance, where we wanted to go. And like most people in the room had aspirations to like be quite senior, but to do it on their own terms. But we all, in talking to ourselves, realised how much we were talking ourselves out of that. It's very common. It's there's the lean-in books. Have you ever read them? Women start taking their foot off the pedal, because particularly when they have children, because they assume you can't do both family stuff and progress your career, and how that we sort of do it to ourselves. Society expects it as well, like you go put the kids first, but we also do it to ourselves. We don't think, actually, if we keep going, you can balance it, it can still work. So I took part in that group, and that changed my perception of, it encouraged me to kind of go, well, no, I shouldn't rule that out. Like, I can keep pushing and not doubt my abilities. Look at what I have achieved. I don't think women are not as good as men at going, I've done this, I've done that, and I've got, I'm good at what I do. I think women tend to just, I don't think they have that internal monologue as much as guys do. So you need more external affirmation of it, maybe from your peers or from somewhere else. So yeah, it enabled me to talk about where I was in my job at the portrait gallery at that time, that group, and it made me be honest with myself and go, I'm in my comfort zone. It's safer for me not to progress because maybe I don't feel I believe quite enough that I can progress to the next level. I don't deserve it. And it made me question that and go, no, because everyone else around me in that group's going, no, you're amazing, you're brilliant, like we can all do this. And it was like we were all kind of geeing each other up. And most people from that group have gone on to like really senior things.
When you were at that point and you were looking at those senior to you, objectively now looking back, were they better than you?
Looking back, no.
Did you think they were?
Yes.
Or was it interesting?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think a lot of it was, it's not like knowledge and core skills, it's just your confidence in the work arena. And that also comes with age. Like the job that I've been doing at the parks was very, very unstructured. It was almost, it was a completely blank page. There's no way I would have taken that on 10 years before. There's no way, although I could have done it, there's no way I would have had the confidence in myself to think, I can make something from nothing, or I can, blag it until it starts working out. I just think, for me personally, that confidence in the workplace definitely really grows in your 40s compared to even to your 30s or 20s.
I think sometimes as well, it's visibility and exposure of a reality of a role. So we had a guest recently who talked about she became a trustee of a charity in her early 20s and was the only person under 60 on the board. She'd never been in a boardroom before. And no one pulled her to one side and said, okay, this is the sort of etiquette of what happens and how it happens, and not to control, but just to make it comfortable for her. So she was prepared to. So the way we try and get around that is we try and make everything open to everyone from interns onwards. So they see board packs and notes and everything like that, because otherwise when you get there, how do you know what to do? No one prepped me for walking. I was mid to late, probably late 20s, but the vast majority of the directors in the public sector were 50s or 60s. You walk into that room, no one says hello, no one, it's just like, oh, okay, right, I'll find somewhere to sit, right, I'm the only one not wearing a tie, remember that next time, and things like that, the sort of rules of engagement. So I think as the confidence bit's clearly a big part of it, but I think all of us can make the senior part of businesses more accessible and understandable to people to make that seem less daunting.
I'd agree with you. I think that's where remote working doesn't help people who are younger in the workplace either, because I was in the workplace, 5 days a week from, age 21. And that's where I learned, looking at how people, exactly like you say, what are people doing in a meeting? What do they bring with them? Do they bring papers? Are you meant to put your hand up and speak? And that's, if you can't see that in action, you're right, it is very exciting.
It makes you more, so we're completely remote and have been from the company starting. And we've got people on the board who had always worked in an office. I kind of had the first 10 years of my career in an office environment and then hybrid, and people coming out now are sort of first and second year people and interns are like, I can't imagine working in an office. How would that even work?
Yeah.
But from a teaching perspective, I think it makes you be more explicit and open about what and why you're doing things. And you have to have a culture where it is 100% fine to go, I don't know what that means. What is that? How are you doing it? But I couldn't have behaved that way in corporate world. You'd have slowed down the important person that needs to be getting on with things. But you have to embed that as a leader now if you're working remotely. Sorry, I digress. So we're at the end of that 13-year period and you're thinking, I want that next challenge. Yeah,
so I didn't really know what it was. I didn't want to just become head of a bigger arts fundraising team. I thought I'll find something different. And I just by chance saw, I think it was on LinkedIn actually, I don't think people really got jobs through LinkedIn, but there was a spec on LinkedIn it said national parks, that's what caught my eye. And then it was quite a general job description, just saying we're looking for I remember that it's saying about, they wanted someone entrepreneurial, sort of self-starter, who can do things sort of on their own. We want to set up a corporate partnership or sponsorship or brand-led partnerships, I can't remember how they described it, for the national parks. It's setting it up from scratch. And I was like, it was fully remote as well. And I was like, sounds a bit wacky. Don't know anything about national parks, but I like the fact that it's, national. And I thought there was some sort of similarity, the National Portrait Gallery is an asset that's owned by the UK, and the national parks are they're not, they're a national asset, aren't they? So I thought that's enough to create some kind of link. So I went along and met the board, because it was just, MPP was just a board then, there was no staff, it was the first recruitment just chatted with them, and a couple of interviews, and that got given the job in National Park. But I said I did shape the role a bit, so it was quite vague. So I said, look, I would do it, but I want to be a development director, because you need to sometimes to open the doors. You need to have I know I'm not managing anyone, but that's also the level that I'm at. So, it was more. I said more days a week than they were suggesting, because they're like, what you want to do, you can't do that in 2.5 days a week. It was 4 days a week, and they were basically right. Yeah, we want to do corporate partnerships. Go.
Just on that point about shaping the role, we've heard that quite a few times in the shoot room, where people said, I saw this opportunity, but I thought actually it could look like this, or need to be like this. And I'd encourage anyone to say that. If you see something that you think, 40, 50% of that looks amazing, the vast majority of people that are recruiting, the ones that think they have a role 100% defined, unless it's in manufacturing or something like that, they're wrong. And most of them won't even say that it's completely defined. There's sort of a broad spectrum, and the person you can adjust and flex. So if you find a role that lots of bits excite you, go for it and start having that conversation. And if you go in with that approach, no one's going to get upset about it. They're going to be, oh, thank you for the thoughts. And if they do get upset, you don't want to work with them anyway.
No, they should like what you're bringing to the party. And if they don't, then it's not the right fit.
Spot on.
So
when, give me a timeline of that. When was that?
2016.
Okay, so you're still living in London at this point?
I was, yes.
Was the relocation on the cards and thinking about moving rural, or?
No, not then. No. My son was 4 then, so he was going to start school locally, and my husband was still commuting for his work into London. So no, we were quite happy where we were.
And the national park part of it, so how much had nature and the environment played a role for you up until that point?
Not at all.
That's fascinating.
So I was really upfront again in the interview, and again this comes to confidence. I was like, I know nothing about national parks. I don't know anything about nature. I live in London. But the reason why I'm applying for this is because actually it's a plus for me that I don't know anything, because what I find interesting will be learning about who you are, what you do, and what is sellable. Because I love learning. So if someone can pay me to learn, that's my dream job, right? So and the fundamentals of partnership making and fundraising are the same, whatever the cause is. So if you can do it, you should be able to apply it to any, international development, human rights, nature, art, doesn't really matter, as long as you're interested in it.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the right hire in terms of you need to make what you do as a specific thing accessible to more people. Hire someone who's not an expert in that thing. So Elle sat in the room, our amazing head of storytelling. We explicitly didn't want anyone who'd worked in comms or marketing in the environment sector. Because it just propagates your language and your acronyms and everything. So we wanted someone who came in and said, no, that doesn't make any sense. That's not how to do it. So
that's what I thought. If I'm trying to sell the idea and partnerships with the national parks to someone who knows as little about it as I do, then I'll be able to meet them where they're coming from.
And it gives the experts freedom to be experts and give you information and ideas to work with. And then so I love that. That's such a bold way of thinking about it.
And I sometimes try and explain it to people, where I went on an induction course for national parks quite early on, and because the parks, there's 15 national parks across the UK, and they've all got their own boards that they're managed by, and those can have up to 15, 20 people on them. So they used to run induction courses for board members, and then I sort of got thrown into that as well. I remember one of the sessions they had was national parks quiz. I was like, oh, and they flashed up images of different national landscapes, and were like, say which park this is in, and it just looked like trees and grass to me. I mean, and people going, oh yes, I can tell by that wall that won't be in that bit of Yorkshire. People were could analyse it from what they were looking at. And I was like, oh, I know, it's literally just trees and grass. I still wouldn't be able to do that. I probably could do a good guess now with some of it, but
how many have you visited?
I visited them all. I have, but some of them very much just for one meeting and then out again. I haven't looked around properly. So
I think you might be the guest who's had more landscapes at their disposal than we have so far.
At my disposal, yes, I can do what I want with them.
Go visit every time. That's a fascinating journey from what on from afar appear very different worlds, but there's a logical bridge to those two completely in terms of you uniting them.
Yeah, and I do think, and it has proved to be the case, that I think being an outsider to that world of sort of landscapes and national parks and the park authorities themselves, when you're doing an externally facing role like I am, where I'm trying to bring new people into the fold, it is a definite advantage to be an outsider. But you have to be very, very sensitive and understanding of the needs of your stakeholders, the landscapes. You can't trash that. But I think bringing a totally different viewpoint as to why people might connect to national parks is what has helped me to be successful in the job. And the parks themselves will have admitted that if they tried to do it themselves, it wouldn't work. They acknowledged they needed a different, they needed a different skill set. It may be someone who is from an urban background. I don't think I've met anyone else in national parks land that's from London. And I'm not saying that being from London is any superpower, but it is a different perspective.
Yeah, genuine diversity of lived experience and opinion.
Yeah,
way of thinking.
yeah.
Culturally, how do the two different worlds operate? So a lot of time spent in the art world and London, and now in the environmental world in the countryside. How do the cultures of those two sort of industries differ?
I think you realise that a culture is very, very urban. The reference points is urban and sort of international, and there's pros and cons to that. And then national parks land. There's so much. Yeah, it's just a totally different frame of reference. But people are people. Like, actually, ultimately, it's not that different. I did worry a bit more about dealing with people who were just from all around the UK in different geographies. But I found that to be brilliant. I've just learned so much.
So much variety.
Yeah. And now living in the countryside for the last few years has given me a different perspective. I do think that a lot of people, if they are city dwellers and have always been city dwellers, do fetishise the countryside and have they project a lot onto the countryside, what they think about country people and country communities and rural living and farming and nature is kind of sort of there for their entertainment. And I would classify myself, I was in that. That's how I viewed it growing up in London. But it was just like a sort of a nice thing for our entertainment, not like an entire world that we completely rely on for our well-being and existence.
Thanks to Esme, our amazing ecologist. She did some lovely research for me to help me understand the background and context behind national parks, because people have an awareness of them, I think, but not necessarily the history. So one of the things we found is the view that the collective role of national parks is supposed to be an innovation engine of green recovery. As we sit here now, would you describe that as a characterisation, an inspiration, an aspiration, or somewhere between? What does that feel like?
I think there is a lot of really good work happening in the innovation space and nature restoration and sort of fighting the effects of climate change in national parks. It's a mixture of we're doing some really great stuff, but the aspiration is to become actual engines at scale. Places where this stuff can happen. So there's an aspiration to sort of to change perceptions and make sort of society at large and funders aware, government included, that we can use the national parks, the people and the knowledge and expertise within them to help us all drive towards these objectives, decarbonising society, restoring biodiversity, strengthening, enriching local communities, and the green recoveries it's described. But the truth is that so there's lots of good things happening, but the truth is national parks are not being resourced to the degree where they could really drive stuff. So, our bigger point is, I don't speak on behalf of the UK national parks, they speak sort of to government sort of themselves. It's not really my role, but I do truly believe that actually if we want to start building society in a direction that is less about sort of consumption and more about renewal and living within our planetary boundaries, we need to start thinking about who do we in society start to empower to make those changes happen. I think national parks could play a really big part in that.
From the background sort of research we did, I was surprised that sort of the concept of sort of nature protection and recovery wasn't actually in the sort of principal thought and design for how they came about.
No.
Can you unpick that a little bit in terms of the origin?
I'm not that knowledgeable about the history of national parks, but the context is they were a post-war idea, and it was about giving people in sort of urban polluted locations the opportunity to access and enjoy, understand and enjoy these landscapes.
That access was the key focus, wasn't it?
Yeah, because there'd been the Kinder Trespass, and it was all about people saying, like, this belongs to us. This is our countryside. We should be able to get on a bus or a train and go and walk in the Peak District. And so that was the idea. So the purposes that were set then are great purposes about understanding and enjoying and enhancing the parks, but it overlay today's societal needs around fighting the biodiversity and climate crises. You can imagine if you could give us some new purposes that were actually much more specifically about enhancing biodiversity, fighting the effects, building climate resilience.
Yeah, because I think if you ask most people, they'd assume that's what it's for, because through a lens now, that is what is needed and is ideal. And I kind of, we spoke to quite a few of the chief execs of the national park. They have one of the hardest jobs in the world, I think, because the dual role of protecting and improving the landscape in every context, built, cultural, societal, environmental, but also welcoming visitors and stimulating. How can those two things coexist? It's so difficult.
Yeah. In the time that I've been in national parks, which is 7, 8, coming to 8 years, there's been quite a shift in how they talk about themselves that I've observed, which has moved from when I started much more about sort of places where people come to walk and hike and like sort of visitor attraction-y sort of speak, and much more now into a much broader way of talking about their purposes, being about the balance between people and nature, and trying to use the landscapes as places where we can do things that are beneficial for society. So it's not just about our enjoyment and inspiration and relaxation. It's about something more societally important than that.
These are homes and communities to tons of people as well, aren't they? I think some people sometimes think of the sort of caricature of a national park as a literal environmental park, as opposed to a series of towns and communities and villages and industries and things like that. So the complexities of dealing with that range of stakeholders must be incredible. Yeah,
it's park authorities, they sort of have to keep a balance between the needs of nature and the needs of people, and I think they do a good job of that, considering they have to be fairly neutral and consider all the different needs of a landscape. So as a result, what they don't own the land. Some of them own a little bit of land, but they're good at sort of convening people, bringing people together sort of for a landscape vision, and they're doing a lot more work in that space that I see. That's really
it's such an underrated skill. So I'm terrible at the skill I'm about to describe. So if someone presents me with a problem or a frustration, I hear, can you please help me fix this problem or frustration? I'm learning that that's not what people necessarily want. They need to clarify and ask, are you just, well, it's better if you don't need to ask sometimes, but are you just telling me, or would you like me to do something about it? And there's people in the team who are amazing at observing and listening and empathizing, but not feeling a need to dive in and help. And I think when you're dealing with that many different stakeholders and the range of opinion, you can't fix, because a fix for one causes a problem for number 2 and number 3 and things. So that is a skill I've seen the parks do beautifully well across the country.
No, they do a really good job. And I just think that there's there's a lot of potential for national parks to start doing more things. But you're right, their purposes currently are quite limiting. So a lot of the stuff that they are doing around sort of climate and biodiversity, they sort of do off the side of their desks. And I think if more resource was put their way, they could really catalyse activity in that space. So that's something that they're talking to government about, and it'd be amazing. So
I'm going to segue to funding now.
Yeah.
So 44 million provided across the 15 national parks?
That figure is more like the 10 English parks. I don't actually have off the top of my head the figures for because Wales, the Welsh and the Scottish national parks are funded directly by Welsh and Scottish government. But the 10 English parks, it's around about 45 million-ish.
Which is, people hear that number and think that's a lot, but not for the scale we're talking about.
Across 10 separate authorities. So they're not one as, also there's no central infrastructure, so they're 10 separate authorities. And quite rightly, they are experts in their local area, so they focus on their landscape. It's the equivalent funding of a secondary school, each authority. I mean, it's absolutely nothing.
Yeah, so an individual national park has the equivalent funding of a single secondary school.
Yeah.
that's mind blowing, isn't it? In terms of
Yeah.
scale of complexity of things you had to deal
Yeah,
with. as
in
well.
real terms, the funding's fallen by, in the last 15 years, I think it's 40% in. So there's been a real contraction of the parks in the size and the sort of the services that they can provide, but it's also not enabled them to think beyond just the sort of mere necessities of what they have to do. But having said that, many of them have therefore worked really hard and progressively to create their own opportunities outside of the bare minimum. They don't want to do the bare minimum, so they're really good at finding partnerships that enable them to do more than just the bare minimum. But it's frustrating because I think if more resource was put their way, so much more value could be generated.
So if we just pause on that real-time cut as well. So if in terms of the balance of what they're dealing with, so you've got a growing population, you've got post-pandemic people who are more engaged and aware of the natural world, a crumbling climate, biodiversity collapse, and a real-time cut.
Yeah.
So the demand to the actual funding gap, it's more than it's like 100%
Yes.
spread in terms of demand and
Yeah.
requirement and scrutiny as well of what
Yeah.
people now expect from, because we're projecting environmental standards on national parks that they were never designed or developed and have never
Exactly.
been funded to deliver.
Exactly.
It's just not fair.
Yeah. So I think whenever there's been coverage about like nature is in poor health in national parks, you might see those headlines saying that, but actually any article I've read that's had that as a headline has then gone on and described why that is and said, well, actually, it's because there's been funding cuts. And actually, they were never set up. They're not conservation organisations.
Context is so important.
So, yeah. So if you look behind the headline, actually, those articles, they're not slamming the national parks at all. They're saying this is a really sorry state of affairs. No wonder nature hasn't been helped in these landscapes because they've not been tasked to do this and not been funded to do it. So other NGOs will step in and do what they can. But if we did want national parks to proactively enhance biodiversity, they could do that if you want to fund them. It's about £800 million. That's what the English national parks have worked out. Like, you want to give us that funding,
I mean, that's
make it
somewhat
happen.
of a funding gap, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I have been guilty, when asked before, do I think we should have more national parks? My shorthand answer is, no, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly as you described with those headline and then article. My answer to that is because I don't think they were set up to do the environmental change that we require, and they're not funded by government, and government love announcing things. So
Yeah.
yesterday they announced a new marine national park in Plymouth. We're going to fund £11 million to set up a marine national park. No statement about ongoing funding after that at all, because there's no votes in doing things well. There's just votes in announcing things.
The idea.
Perception of that, I don't know if that's true, I'm not a pollster, but the perception is you announce things, and at my time in public sector is, what can we announce this week? I remember just saying,
Yeah.
could we do something this week? Rather than just announcing it. Madness. So exactly, you talked about how necessity has been the sort of spark for innovation in some of the parts, because they've had to create those partnerships and want to. So how can private sector funding and investment help in the process?
So I'll focus on something that we're doing, which is about nature restoration at scale, so quite akin vision to what Oxygen's looking to do. And that's a partnership that MPP that I work for created with Palladium Group, the sort of impact-led consultancy that's called Revere. And in 2019, I met with all the chief execs of the parks, and because we used to hold these sort of big ideas days where we'd get ideas from all the parks to hear what they're passionate about, where do they feel when they collaborate together they can create impact, and then use that as inspiration for us at MPP to try and think, is that a partnership opportunity? Is there something we could package up? And in 2019, they were talking, for the first time I'd heard them really talking about nature, the opportunity to help towards a net zero society through sequestration of carbon through nature, through peatland restoration and planting. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I've never heard them talk to me about, weirdly, I've been in the parks for 3 years. They've not talked to me about nature and climate before. And I was interested in it. And so I said, okay, well, what would that look like if you worked together? Like, what would you actually do? If money was no object, what would you do to like be part of this fight against climate change and biodiversity loss? And so I gathered together like projects with costs attached to them and made a portfolio, and it was 19 projects, and it was about £240 million worth of work that they could sort of say. That was like the tip of the iceberg, like this is what we do tomorrow if like the money fell out of the sky. And I was like, wow, I've never seen scale like that in it. I'd done partnerships, but everything had been quite small in relation
That's
to
true of the
that.
whole sector. So
Yeah.
we spoke to chief exec of Triodos Bank earlier, who brilliant guy, and he said the same challenge was there. It wasn't a quantum that made it commercially interesting enough. So you achieved that.
Yeah. So I was like, oh wow, that's kind of a big scary amount, but I kind of like it. And then COVID happened, and it actually gave me space to focus on working it up and exploring the market for that. Would companies want to work with us in some way on this? I don't know how. So I literally just went out and said, I don't really know what I'm looking for. I just want to chat with you about like this work we'd like to do, and how would you as a company want to interact with it? Because it was COVID times, like business as usual had stopped. So I wasn't able to work on like commercial sponsorships. So it gave me the space to look at this. And that was quite a gift really, because I found that people were interested, but they were saying, well, yeah, I can support this philanthropically and give you, a couple of $100,000 here and there. But actually, where I think my budgets are going to come from is when it comes to like my sort of net zero operational funding, or anything that's to do with carbon credits or to do with that side of things. So are you planning to offer those? I was like, I don't think we really know how. So I went to my board and said, look, people are really interested in this. I think my gut feeling is like, this could be really interesting for us, but we need to be able to work out about the whole carbon credit side of it, because that will unlock a whole different sort of volume of potential funding. And they were like, oh, okay. And then one of the companies I was speaking to as part of that market search was Palladium, and had a chat with them. And they were like, oh, we do all this stuff in the tropics. We set up these projects. Like, we know all about sort of these new land use change economic models. We're looking to do stuff in the UK. And every bit of expertise I had was like the missing piece of the jigsaw for me. Like, it was the best phone call ever. And I said, at the end of it, I was like, I really want to work with you guys, but I haven't got any money. I can't pay you to be like our consultants for this. And they were like, no, we do it, like, we won't charge you. Like, we want to do an R&D collaboration with you. And I was like, oh my God, this is too good to be true. So that was the start of the Palladium collaboration, because we had the sort of vision of what these projects were, but they had all the sort of commercial mechanisms, yeah. The understanding the environmental side of it, the potential for the natural capital markets. But they were still at the start of their journey in the UK thing. So we were sort of met each other, we both had each other's missing pieces. So that was the start of the collaboration that is called Revere, which is an opportunity for us to enter into those sort of natural capital markets with really high quality ethical nature restoration projects that are investable. But because we're at this sort of development stage of it, and we're just getting to the commercial side of it, most of the funding to date has not been investment, it's just been philanthropic. So working with companies like Estee Lauder and Santander UK, they've been funding the innovation side of it, so they've been funding it philanthropically. They're not like investing for a return at this point in time, but our big projects will be investable. So
what point do you hope that an amazing corporate will be able to purchase a national park carbon credit, for example?
Well, we're not going to call them national park carbon credits, but
Have
specifically.
You thought of the branding yet?
Well, it's just Revere. We're not going to give they're going to be woodland code carbon credits, woodland or peatland. So we'd be using those codes rather than trying to set up our own standard. But Revere is the branding, I guess. So we've already sold some. Santander did buy some as part of the first peatland deal that we did. But yeah, we're really close. We've designed some projects that haven't yet got invested in, but it will happen this year.
So do you think you'll be planting trees this year?
Ideally, it's possible. Yeah,
that'd be super exciting.
Yeah, we've restored peatland. We're restoring peatland in Scotland. But yeah, we're really keen to get some trees in the ground.
Do you think when it comes to a marketing and a sale perspective on this, do you think there'll be a distinction between people's willingness to buy credits that have come from an afforestation or a peatland project?
There's less. I mean, peatland, because they're avoidance credits rather than removals, it's a different. I wouldn't say less interest, but there's a different market for those.
I think it's less tangible and less exciting for people than afforestation. I think they find it easy to conceptualise a tree being planted.
Yes, there's people, when you describe peatland restoration and the process, it is pretty cool, and it's also like really quick compared to trees. So on the plus side, it happens like really as soon as the intervention happens, you start getting the benefit.
We've got some wonderful pictures of us visiting some estates in Scotland with peat hags that are 7 feet deep.
Yeah.
And people see them, even at a landscape scale, you look back from a drone footage and you think, oh, well, that looks like a groove in the ground.
Yeah.
And realise the scale of...
Yeah, like a 10,000 years worth of peaters like being washed down the hill.
Yeah, too many of everything, sheep, deer, and too much human interaction on there.
So we're getting close. I mean, in terms of like how companies can interact with it, there's the philanthropy side of it, which is like helping us a lot. It's been quite cool. Companies have liked what we're doing, wanted to get behind it, and just say, yeah,
We've got such a great brand collectively. National parks are such a wonderful, iconic, and emotionally connected thing for people. So yeah, building on the back of that is so exciting.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we're getting closer to it, but it's hard. You know, it's really hard work. We face many similar challenges to you. The only difference in our model and yours, because we're both looking for scale, both looking to restore nature really high quality, is that we work with existing landowners. I know you do that as well, but we don't acquire, and we're not facilitating acquisition of land. But I've seen you putting up on LinkedIn like your, challenges of the week. How can we collaborate to solve these problems? They're the same problems that we have.
The thing about that is. My intent was exactly as you described there, because lots of people had come to me with those problems but hadn't sort of outed them. I'm like, no, we've got them too.
Yeah.
And it was to tell all the wildlife trusts and the woodland trust that these are all the same challenges we're all grappling with.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that the people who came back with responses were those who were trying to solve, who had encountered that one issue in one specific place.
Yes.
And every place is different. So,
yes.
The culture, the relationship with people to place, the economics, the industries are all different, and a tool that we apply in the Scottish Highlands is not going to work in Norfolk or in Dartmoor, for example. So it's listening and respecting and adopting what you can, but knowing that those places are unique and different things. And one of our key things is encouraging access to nature. In Scotland, obviously, that's not an issue. There's a right to roam everywhere. You want to make it safe to people as possible. So I think right to roam in England would make things much simpler. But since it doesn't exist, actively trying to find routes for places like wild camping and for things like wild camping and stuff like that is something that we've got to do if we want people to understand and love the environment and protect it. Because if you can't connect with it, you're not going to.
It's not going to happen. Yeah. Your point about that's part of the challenge for me actually in representing like all 15 of the parks is how different they are. So some of our partnerships, like our UK partnerships, where all of the parks do the same thing. So we've got a partnership with BMW called Recharge in Nature, which is quite cool, which is a mixture of like EV charging post infrastructure that they're helping us to grow across the parks, which is great for everyone. And also some grants that go towards a whole range of projects that happen in parks. So that's really equally distributed across the parks, that partnership.
Feels like a cultural sweet spot.
It's a really nice partnership, that one. So that's very equitable across the parks. Well, something like Revere, because it's like us heading into like quite an unknown place in terms, it's not like, oh, we're going to do Revere in every park, because the natural capital in every landscape is very, very different. So some places you can capitalise on woodland planting, some you can capitalise on peatland, and others it's, or BNG maybe in some locations if they've got, things being built in those locations or near them. But other locations, it's just not suitable for them, or they're made up of a patchwork of multiple smaller landholders, like lots of little farms, where you need a very different model and you need a completely different level of social engagement for it to take place. So it's happening, but we're not doing the same to all the parks, and that's been quite a challenge for me to be able to sort of communicate that to parks and say it's not a typical business as usual sponsorship, this natural capital work. We're having to sort of focus in areas maybe where it could grow fastest in order to prove that it can work, and it's not going to be the same in the Broads as it is in Cairngorms. I
think it's so exciting. I mean, if we'd have had this conversation 10 years ago, and someone had said the national parks would be even embarking on the sort of work and partnership stuff, and with such a commercial mindset as now, no one would have believed you. You moved mountains in that period. It's quite cool to have started something from scratch, and I quite liked that there was a completely blank page, because I couldn't inherit anyone else's mistakes. Like if anyone's going to cock it up, it'll be me. And then at the same time, it's risky, because then it all falls on me and the team. It's not all. It remains challenging, but I think national parks are moving with the times, and I think we have every right. I spent a lot of time sort of saying to people, I know it might feel a bit risky to sort of do a partnership with a big global brand like BMW or Columbia, but we do have a right to be doing this. Like our sort of stablemates out there in the environment sector are doing this. Like we should be doing it. We are good and valuable. We should
be proud of our ability to go and do this stuff. And I know it feels risky, but it can be done. So I feel like with MPP, we're proving that it can be done. It's not easy, and sometimes you will get pushback. You know, you will get negative press, but that's part and parcel of it. In my
doing anything, trying to change
yeah.
anything, and often we shoot at the people who are trying to solve the problem rather than the ones who are just sat on the sidelines not doing anything.
Yeah, and overall, it's. I think it's what the parks deserve. I think they should have a higher profile, and they should be sat at the table where decisions are being made. And so yeah, it's nice to have started that journey for them.
And it's what we all need. We need things to be put in place that help the climate and help biodiversity. Otherwise, the next generation haven't got a hope in hell, have they?
No, I think the frustration for me is that I think it's a very long. I think we're at the start of a new cycle, and what's likely to be a sort of 30, 40-year cycle in society of like slow awareness of like actually everything needs to change.
Yeah.
So it feels
and the
frustrating.
curse, right? We get to be there at the start of this natural capital economy and it growing. And the other phrase I heard was a nature-connected economy, which I quite like as well. So we get to be at the start, but we probably don't get to see, certainly in our sort of working lives, when it's flying. And
yeah, when you get to a tipping point, it becomes just the way that everything is. But for me, it's like if I feel that it's broadly the right thing to be doing, then that's enough for me, I think.
Totally agree. This very much felt like the perfect time to have this conversation. I can't wait for, hopefully you'll come back and talk about the projects when they are flying and you're on those next stages. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you in the showroom. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.